Well, it's probably Spelljammer, but you already knew that because 4 Spelljammer races appeared in that Travelers of the Multiverse playtest document last year. So we're not talking about old D&D settings just being republished. We're talking about my top 2 predictions for the next new setting. Air quotes, because we can be almost certain that any new campaign setting from WotC will be a reskinned version of a popular classic setting with a guaranteed audience. And if you've been to the movies in the last 10 years, you probably see my point here. But in this case, it's not just about popularity. Eberron, the Ravenloft expansion, the Critical Role's Exandria, and all these Magic the Gathering settings that nobody really asked for were published as is, 1, because they had that guaranteed audience, and 2, because they were relatively family-friendly. That's become very important to D&D as a brand. So really, we are left with this very simple question. What former D&D settings were beloved by fans, but also warrant changing their name to be marketed as a new setting? And to answer that question, we're going to be... Hey, what the... Get over here. So to answer that question, I'm going to break down this list of every major D&D setting to find the ones that are most likely to be rebranded for the next new setting book. Or if you just want to know my predictions without hearing the evidence, I'm pretty sure it's going to be either Birthright or Dark Sun. But please share in the comments what your predictions are and describe what you think an actually new setting from WotC would look like. Describe it. An online library of rich, descriptive text for you to easily search and plug right into your game when you want to wow your players with a bit of cinematic flavor. Describe has a bunch of free places, monsters, spells, and even some cool interactive maps that you should totally check out. But if you sign up, you can save 10% with the promo code BOB. Alright, we can throw out the settings that WotC legally cannot use. Conan, as in The Barbarian, now has his own RPG published by another company. Diablo, like the video games, had a crossover with AD&D, don't think they have the rights anymore, but anyway, it's definitely too dark for that family-friendly branding. Lankmar, cited by Gygax for partly inspiring Dungeons & Dragons, was ironically sold off to Goodman Games for Dungeon Crawl Classics. And Rokugan of AD&D's Oriental Adventures, which has been basically denounced by WotC, now belongs to the Legend of the Five Rings RPG. Next, we can just cross out the settings we already have in 5e, like Eberron, Ravenloft, and... What's that other one? And we can omit the classic settings that are so popular, there's no way WotC would dare to reskin, rebrand, and rename them like Blackmoor, Dragonlance, Greyhawk, Mystara, and Planescape. Then here I get to make a small number of people very angry by cutting some settings that just didn't appear to be very popular based on the community post where I asked for your help making a list of the major D&D settings. Jakandor, Mahasarpa, Thunder Rift, Exandria... Just kidding. And Pelennor, which was mentioned at least once, but seems like a mostly urban theme that's already covered in 5e. Speaking of themes, a few popular settings such as Al-Qadim, Karator, and Maztica have also been officially marked by Wizards of the Coast as being pretty problematic, so I don't expect them to come back in any form whatsoever, and boy, am I not looking forward to some of the comments I might get about that. But we're also going to talk about Dark Sun soon, so... I guess I totally did this to myself. Another little setting with real-world cultural themes is the Ravenloft Gothic Earth subsetting, aka Mask of the Red Death, which mostly relies on literary horror themes, but also literally uses London, England as part of the setting. And I could totally see this one coming back. It already has a new book published on the DM's Guild, but Wizards probably would just use the same name, so it doesn't really fit our criteria here for becoming a new setting. Now, a few folks also mentioned a subsetting of Mystara called the Savage Coast, but I feel like anything coast-related would just be on that really popular one, the Sword Coast. And there's Hollow World, the interior of Mystara, with dinosaurs being a big feature, but that's already covered by Chult, so I think we're good. And Council of Worms was a box set with rules for player characters to play as dragons, which sounds pretty fun, but since nothing like that was included in the recent dragon-themed 5e sourcebook, I can't see it coming back anytime soon. And one more that I'm almost sorry to eliminate because a lot of people seem to love it is Nentir Vale, aka Points of Light, the core setting of D&D 4e. First of all, everyone knows we're not supposed to talk about 4e, but besides an amazingly detailed starting town, the main feature seems to be that the setting is intentionally incomplete, allowing the gaps to be filled by imported or homebrew content. And personally, I love this idea for a campaign setting, but a lack of detail is not something WotC could easily sell for $50. So we're down to the two settings I listed earlier, Birthright and Dark Sun. The original Birthright box set was released by TSR in 1995 for AD&D 2e and had about 30 supplementary publications, ending only a year later in 1996. But for being so short-lived, this was by far the most common response on that community post, so I can only assume the products were overshadowed by other big settings of the time like Planescape and Dark Sun. But the folks who did play Birthright still love it today. In this setting, the player characters belong to powerful bloodlines with the divine right to rule in this high fantasy feudal system that seems to be heavily based on medieval Europe. It includes a mechanic called Regency to measure the player's control over domains which grow in power with the characters. And I think pairing this large-scale, domain-level play combined with typical party-focused D&D offers a unique Game of Thrones style that 5e really hasn't tried yet, while also presenting this classical European fantasy backdrop that could attract players of all ages. But here's the problem that necessitates some rebranding. While the gods in D&D can absolutely favor specific people and grant them the right to rule over others, I think the very real historical belief in a divine right to rulership caused way too much war and suffering in the real world for wizards to base a product line on it today. Fortunately, they can totally scrap that snippet of lore, but keep the domain level mechanics and just change the name from Birthright to something like the Crowns of some fantasy location name, and you're good to go. Dark Sun is a little more tricky, but the pros are obvious. Gritty post-apocalyptic desert setting that completely differentiates it from the Tolkien-esque themes of normal D&D. There are no gods. Arcane magic is taboo because it destroys the setting's already limited natural resources, and psionic powers are a feature for all player classes. It was originally published in 1991 with striking artwork that's kind of funny because everybody's always striking a pose, and it was super popular. Even after TSR weirdly decided to cancel the line, Paizo kept it alive using the OGL, and then Wizards of the Coast finally brought it back officially in 2010 under 4e and including more popular D&D races than the original setting. But part of the reason some of those races were missing was because of the cleansing wars, which is just as genocidal as it sounds. There's also a lot of slavery, and even cannibalistic halflings. So the only way I can see D&D bringing the setting back, which they probably want to do because people still love it, and they could totally capitalize on the current popularity of the Dune saga, would be to create a new post-apocalyptic desert setting with psionic characters under a different name. But the real question is, would such a book turn out to be good enough to make my short list of buyable D&D 5e books described in this video? You know, described? Keep building.